The more and more I work with people, the more and more I realize that there are going to be some absolutes for every individual I work with. There will be insecurities, there will be fears, there will be traumas, there will be wounds. I also realize that for every person that I've worked with, that there will be strength, there will be gifts, there will be a personal expression of love, and there will be the ability to create something authentic in every human I've worked with. Now, the more that I do this, the more I'm beginning to realize the absolute necessity for a value system that is neglected in one of the most important processes of our lives, our intimate relationships. And it's like, oh my God, why is this such an intellectual conversation? And I realize there's a reason why it's become such an intellectual conversation, because it's the only way to save a society that's deteriorating the way that it is. As that you almost need to get people to retether themselves to the very things that have allowed them to create long-lasting relationships without it being a delusional mask. And so we're kind of faced with that. There's been a lot coming to mind, and I've realized that a majority of us are traumatized in relationship to God. It's a very particular kind of trauma, and I like to call it like the God trauma situation, because it's something that exists in every single individual, and it is something for an individual to connect to in their own way, their own right, and it's there for everyone. If you're a human being, you have access to it. Now, that's far from our souls, that's far from our hearts. And in a lot of ways, it creates such a divergence between each other. I know the one thing that we all seek is freedom, connection, and to be able to continue to grow that, to watch how it evolves into some of the most beautiful, and some would even say good, characteristics, memories, experiences, hell, things, forms of expression. I've struggled in my life with relationships, and I guess that made me start this. I was like, oh, I have all these traumas and all of these insecurities, how can I get them to stay? I have abandonment issues, I have mommy issues, women are hard for me to understand. And I started doing all of this work, and I became really good at it. And I became good enough to the point where I can teach it and help other people do the same thing for themselves. I also hit a point where I realized, who the fuck is doing this work? And I looked around, because you go on 3 or 4 dates with the modern human, you've never asked yourself a serious question a day in your life, and you interact with things that have infinite consequence? Okay, where were your parents? Oh, you didn't have any? Well, this makes a lot more sense. Well, who else had a broken family? Everybody puts their hand up, and you're like, okay, something's up here. What's wrong? What's happening? What are we experiencing? Have you ever tried building in chaos? Here's what happens. You have no truth, so you're not really building off of anything. So what you do is you kind of create paradigmatic thinking, as in thinking from paradigms, like assuming that these things are absolutes. And you create this bubble in delusion. And as you're floating in delusion, you're telling yourself that anything that threatens the bubble is the exact opposition of the truth that you claim to protect, when really you're nowhere to be found, you've completely strayed, and actually you're crying in the corner, and you haven't faced anything about reality, and you haven't even accepted that you've strayed from the path. That's exactly where most people's lives are. They don't want to incorporate truth into it. And so as I was talking with my manager before this, I realized that there are some things that people do not have access to, and I believe it's a value system that allows them to have the bare minimum that allows them to succeed in their life. I talked about this in the previous videos as principles, and what every individual needs in their life. And I wanted to be able to incorporate a few things together today, because I believe that those two things working in harmony with each other will really help people understand that, oh my God, if you are really seeking love, what that's going to take from your life, the kind of work that you're going to have to do. And I believe that's the kind of work one desires to do to create the love that they seek. So first off, I want you to be able to understand, maybe you're not this person that you dream of becoming. You're full of inadequacies, your errors, etc. And I was that person. And I realized that I was. And there was a film that I've watched recently, of course, after this point in my life, to where I've been just looking to embrace these things. I've realized that, every single gift that I ever had in my life and every possible manifestation of every wound has been beautiful, because I haven't been trying to fix it. Of course, the parts of myself that I reject the most are in relationship to love and intimacy. And I was like, my God, I could only imagine the kind of shame that people are walking around with. I could only kind of imagine the kind of confusion that people are having. I have an excellent foundation, an excellent circumstance, and an excellent ability to even do what I do. That's extraordinary. Well, I better give with it, that's for sure. I better dedicate my life to that. There's this movie that I wanted to share with you, and I believe it's going to be a movie that's going to help change your life, and you guys should definitely watch it. One of them is I talk a lot about traumas, but I help people understand them differently. Today, what I'm going to be getting into is that you guys start investigating these parts of yourself, that you can stop associating shame to them, that you begin to realize that the very gifts that you seek are from them, and that the bare minimum that you will ask from others is going to be a standard that others may believe they will never have in their life. And like I said, it's a bare minimum. The movie's called American Werewolf in London. It's an 80s horror film. The inspiration for Michael Jackson's Thriller, too. I believe he's the guy that also directed that video. I want to tell you a little bit about the story and then take that story into relationship to your life so that you can eventually start realizing why you're here, what exactly your purpose is, and what isn't just going to raise your overall baseline for yourself. Because if people aren't doing this and assuming that their life has meaning and that they should investigate and show up for their life, here's the implication for relationships and dating for the rest of your life here. That you are going to be the other person that has to do everything for them. Breathe, drink, shit, and wipe their ass. And that's going to be an expectation on you for the rest of that relationship as they continue to give nothing, as they take everything that they have from you. Or show up to your life like as if that's why you're here for the rest of your life, and continue to make commitments to where you continue to give everything that you have and to connect deeper to the parts of yourself every day of your life. And you will have people that will show up for you in ways that you would never believe, that will genuinely allow you to realize that human goodness is real. So the movie starts off with David Kessler, Jewish guy. Of course, the movie was very powerful to me because I remember when I watched the movie the other day, all of these triggers came up, all of these things that I felt shame about came up. And it was like, my God. And it's like, what did I feel shame about? You guys are going to laugh. I felt shame about how much love I give. It's like, okay, well, what created that? Well, the very wound created that. The very, so to speak, curse created that. And even using these terms, so much comes up to mind. So, well, it's an American Jewish boy out in London enjoying their 3 months in Europe. And, of course, what are they talking about? They're talking about sex. Now, I find it very interesting because anybody who's met a Jewish boy of sorts or has hung around them in intimate spaces understands that typically things revolve around sex, women, power, etc. And I find it very interesting because I do believe that that is created through somebody's development over years and years and years of exposure to particular kinds of traumas, right? But that creates a particular kind of person. Some would even say gifted. And so the movie already starts off with both of them talking about this girl that they want to sleep with, that girl that they want to sleep with, and they go to a bar. In that bar, they realize that, hey, this place is kind of haunted. We should probably stick to the path, and the path is this road. And in that road, of course, they stray off the path, and there's a werewolf. The werewolf kills his friend. He wakes up in a hospital from this trauma, being scratched by it or bitten by it. We don't really know what happens. But of course, there's this immediate chemistry between the nurse and the young boy. And it's like, well, probably because she has this real deep inclination to take care and love this guy, which is going to be very, very attractive to a young Jewish boy who didn't really get that from his mother growing up because she was most likely a Holocaust survivor. And it's very hard to show signs of warmth or any of those kind of characteristics of sensitivity because those are the things that you get in luxury. Those are things that you get in a perfect world, not the wounded world or the unforgiving one that we see that we have to literally face every day and realize, I need to connect deeper to what I believe is good. I need to connect deeper to what genuinely fulfills me outside of all of the circumstance that could snatch it away in an instant, because I need to show up for those things because of how much they matter. And so you can already see there's a deep kind of chemistry they have. She finds him cute, etc. Probably because he has this kind of intense nature to him. And you could see that he kind of almost functions like a werewolf. He believes that he is one because he saw that. Something came up from the surface, something that he shamed, something that he believed was a monster. And of course, with her ultra healing characteristics, she wants to tend to him and only him. And he starts having these dreams. And in these dreams, they come up after the death of his friend. Who knows what happened? They were attacked by a stranger. And he feels like he's a stranger in a strange land. And I'm sure you've heard that one before. He then immediately is pulled to this comfort of this girl, right? But of course, at the same time, all of these things were coming up. It's like, what godly shit timing. Like, of course, if this never happened, I would have never met this girl. And I also would have never faced these parts of myself. And he has these nightmares about his family getting killed as a bunch of demon-faced Nazis are coming into his home and killing everyone that he loves. He wakes up from these nightmares and he's convinced that he's fucked up, that he's a monster of sorts. The most beautiful part of the movie is being able to realize that this very person's wounds attracts the very person that could heal those wounds, who also has similar wounds in relationship to the parts of themselves that they believe cannot be loved. We're mirroring each other in such a deep way. There's this also very fundamental trauma that I believe that we all experience as human beings. It's to feel strange. It's like to be an individual is going to make you feel like a stranger everywhere that you go. And I believe there's one biblical passage, one that has transcended quite literally all identity as we know it, but is told through the context of the Jewish people, which is also beautiful, is that you were once a stranger in a strange land. So love the stranger like you would yourself. And isn't that like the absolute most beautiful commandment? It's the commandment that inspires others to bring out the parts of them that are strange, that you don't quite understand, but to give them the same kind of space that you would give yourself, to bring that same aspect of God to the world. But you can see he's scared. It's like, God damn, like I know what that felt like. I felt this kind of shame in relationship to myself that felt like a werewolf. Like all of this came up. But there was a beautiful aspect of the story, is that there was a sexual line, and it's like where there's sex, there's typically healing and the ability to heal these wounds. And that's a beautiful thing. Isn't that great? Like, I get to have sex and do inner healing work? Yes, I would hope so. That's if you're doing it right. And there was this one scene where she takes him home and she comforts him and she brings him into the contents of this own home and she tells him every part of her life and how her sexual interests are straightforward with him, that she doesn't have a couch. She's into him. And there's this scene between them, and it's a very intimate scene. This intimate scene brought up a lot of the wounds that we feel that could only be healed through some of the most intimate environments. And in my life, I didn't get a lot of touch. I had a shit relationship with my mother. I was the youngest of 7 brothers, sent to an all-boys school. Women were fucking invisible to me. I looked at that and I realized how beautiful it was. And the first thing I felt when I looked at it was shame. And it was like, shame for the most pure thing that we could ever experience, human intimacy. That's the most honest thing we could experience. Talk about the one thing that gets the most shit in the whole world, sex. Oh, well, it's been also the thing that I've been fighting a lot against, because where there's sex, there's the birth of an individual. We celebrate it. We have bar mitzvahs. We have puberty parties, for God's sake. It's like, well, why? Because we understand that that's where the person becomes their own person, right? And it's like, well, what's incorporated when a person becomes their own person? Sexuality. But where there's that, I promise you, there's people that have lied to you about it. There's people that have overexposed you to it. Or maybe you've been left in environments to where people are completely and totally naive to how sex exists even since you're born. It's part of life, but it's never talked about. And so we all are hurt in these manners. But I saw the connection that he shared with the girl and how deep their bond was and what he was struggling with. And what he was struggling with were the darkest parts of himself that were coming up after a trauma. Gentlemen, ladies, this is exactly where you start investigating the parts of yourself. It's after these moments that incite something in us, a part of us that wakes up, that feels like almost like the curse of a werewolf. And of course, they have this beautiful love-making scene. And I usually wouldn't say I applaud that in film, but usually I looked at this and I was like, that right there is what I seek. And it's because of the wounds that I have that made me immediately want to reject this part. But I knew that if I did, I would lose that part. And that's when it gave me the additional perspective, which is, I have to embrace those even more. I have to come closer to those characteristics because they shape the very thing that I desire. And it's like, well, then why do I feel shame about it? Because there's something deep down that I reject about me. Something deep down that I believe cannot be loved. And of course, he felt the same way. He wakes up that night and he sees his dead friend, kind of like an inner dialogue. And he tells him, David, you got to kill yourself. What you were bitten by was a werewolf. And it's a curse. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to turn into this monster. You're going to kill everybody that you love around you. And I won't be set free until you do. The second I saw that in the movie, I'm like, I'm not watching a werewolf film, am I? And I was like, this is a story about somebody who's deeply struggling with the parts of himself that he believes he needs to kill in order to let other people free. Wow, what a fucking false paradigm, right? Talk about the kind of struggle to be an individual. What it is to be a stranger, for God's sake, is so internal to all of us if we're aspiring towards truth. You're going to isolate very quickly from the people around you. And of course, later that night, he turns into a werewolf. And there's 6 victims that he kills because he did turn into this beast. Well, you can understand what the symbol of a werewolf is. It's all the parts of yourself that only exist at night that are brought out through the moon being the feminine symbol. They exist in hiding. They're not in your life. They're the parts of you that you feel shame about. When do those things start to come up to the surface? It's like, well, after a breakup, when somebody rejects everything about you, it's like, these are the things you guys need to start looking at if you really want to start opening up yourself. And I'm using this story in this film because it's personal to me, and you guys will have your own stories and your own piece of art that allows you to reflect your inner works and your inner struggles. The beautiful part of the story is it's beautiful because you realize that these parts of you can be loved. Spoiler alert for the whole film. Probably should put that earlier. But there are parts of ourselves that feel a lot like a werewolf. They feel a lot like a curse. But they're so deeply capable. And I think you might like this. All women like typically these 5 things, and they're going to be in every erotica book that was ever written. Billionaires, surgeons, vampires, pirates, and werewolves. And I find that very interesting. So you don't need to reject these very characteristics. In fact, actually, those are the very characteristics that are loved by women. And I think that for men, that allows them to open it up, and for women, that allows them to actually be challenged by the part of them that wants to unconditionally love, which is given to all women across the board. One of the scenes in the movies that really woke me up was the realization of how they constantly tied this sexual undertone. And I think typically where there's sex, there's typically shame, because that was the first thing we identified when we had consciousness, because it's the most powerful thing. It is the most powerful thing in our lives, the ability to create life. It's not just because we create sculptures and bridges, but just because of what we are, we can create life. Of course, there's going to be an inclination, an immediate one, because of the kind of darkness that it is required in order to really create a space for that. Another massacre happens. Many people are dying in relationship to this, but you could already feel the internal struggle of him. And by the way, the relationship between him and the girl are constantly a back and forth. The end of the movie is the most powerful scene, where he's lined up against the wall as the werewolf that he is. And she breaks through the wall of police officers that all have their guns aimed down at him. And she faces him in the corner of the alley, and she looks him in the eyes and she goes, "I love you, David." And there's a pause. And for a second, you could see the werewolf's face soften and then reject it and jump at her as the werewolf gets killed. I watched that movie and I was like, what the fuck? Because that's the only thing I could say. Like, I felt personally attacked on I never felt that triggered, for use of a better word, in my whole life. But I also never got to come so close to the thing that I desired the most, to have that part of me loved. The crazy part is she told him the truth that he couldn't receive, because he didn't know these things about him, and he didn't have a foundation to receive these things about him. When she told him, "I love you," she showed the transcendent aspect of human nature that can love those things, because they understand that those are the very things that make them feel loved. Now, nobody can receive this if they have not been given a foundation about reality that has shaped our lives. Let me tell you the very values that are lacking in today's society. All of them are biblical. But I'll tell you the ones that are really lacking. You were made in God's image. To understand that is to understand that even those things that are very dark are possible of being loved. That's no longer here. The ability to really understand what that means that you're open to investigating all things in your life. Neither good nor bad, yet they are parts of life, they are parts of reality, and that you can integrate them. The other one is that your humanity and your spirit are not separate, they're collective. Through your humanity is your spirit. And in fact, they're simultaneously together, because there is no investigating the spirit without our humanity. And we have all of this mysticism surrounding an avoidance of the flesh, and avoidance of who we are, and avoidance of these things that we need to face. And it's like, if I had one life, and I had one life to really show up with everything that I had, it would be one where everything that I am is everything that I need in order to find the truth about myself. But now we live in a world where that thing is immediately bad. And imagine that, where you reject the very thing about you that gives the love to the people that you love the most, would be to eliminate love from this world. And I want to make this clear as my final message to you, is that love will be the greatest challenge of your life. When I watched this film, I realized that what challenged me the most was love, because those parts of me were loved in the process and would need to be there in order to do the loving. Sex, religion, politics, God. Wow. The very things we can no longer have at our dinner parties anymore, because somebody will get triggered. The implications of this world that we're continuing to go down is that people can no longer have conversations around truth because their foundations are so weak. To incorporate a strong life, you have to create a foundation for truth in order to receive it. Because if not, then you're the monster and the bad guy for everything that you feel that is human, pure, and is the bridge towards the love that you seek.